Oh man, advice. We get so much unsolicited advice. And I was just yesterday at my brother's party. My brother did something, and he like reacted to something that his son did. Like his son dropped the ice cream
Okay.
on his he gave him his ice cream because it was my niece's birthday, third birthday. He gave his son his ice cream. His son immediately drops it. He's 5.
Hopefully you're outside.
And my brother was like, got really mad at him and was
Hmm.
like, "You need to." And I know it was an accident, but it doesn't matter if it's an accident. Even if you have an accident, that still has consequences. It's not an excuse. And he had this whole thing. And my initial reaction is, I gotta jump in here and give advice on how to parent your kid because this is not how what you say.
I know. I just
And
had
then
big feelings too. You could see.
exactly. And then the kid my nephew walks away and my brother turns to me. I held back. I was very proud of myself.
Bravo.
I held back and he goes, "Just so you know, we've been having a lot of problems where he keeps having these quote unquote doing accidents and then trying
Mm.
to ask for forgiveness afterwards. And I'm trying to teach him that just because an accident isn't a free pass." And I'm like,
Such a good reminder of why not to give
exactly.
advice.
What he said, which my initial reaction was on top of an entire parenting process that he was very intentionally
Right.
doing that I
Yep.
knew nothing about.
Yep.
So we want to talk about advice, unwanted advice. As single parents, we get it all the time. And what we all should be thinking about before we open our mouths.
I'm Lily, single mom to teen twins.
I'm recording in here.
And I'm Scott, single dad to a preteen boy. Dad! It's under the sink!
We're two old friends trying to navigate single parenting.
And spending the whole time thinking, I hope I don't fuck this up. You also, I'm sure, run into this all the time. Like, what kind of advice do you get when you're out and about?
I'm not very receptive to advice in general. So maybe I don't get as much as people give to somebody like you. Like I think dads in general, single or not, tend to get a lot of really unsolicited advice. My ex would constantly get advice when he was out with the kids, especially
Really?
when they were really, really little. Because he's the one who stayed home with them until kindergarten. And so you're out doing your dad thing, and that baby needs a hat. How come that baby doesn't have any socks on? How come they're not in school? Like before they were school age, we had constantly people would ask him, "How come that baby's not in school?" And he's like, "They're 3. Like it's fine." But I think in general, like because I try not to give unsolicited advice, I think people get that I'm not terribly receptive to
I
it.
know.
Um
I know.
al-
Lily has vibes. She puts the vibes out. People pick
I
up the vibes.
Well, I also think that part of the problem is I always seem like I know what I'm doing, whether I actually do or not. I enjoy feeling that way, which is not totally healthy. Yeah, not that I wouldn't take advice from the right people, and not that my own parents haven't given it when it wasn't asked for. But I think like my mom is not really like that either. Like even when I had little kids, like she wouldn't give advice. I guess it's just not her nature either. I mean, my dad has said things like, "Those kids need their own room in a backyard, and like you should move." Like, well, thank you for your advice, but we're okay. Um, so it's not something that I enjoy getting when it's unsolicited. How about you?
It's funny. Like I have different reactions to who's giving me the advice, and it's all fairly
Mhm.
internally negative, but it's still but like strangers giving me advice.
Yeah.
People that out of that I have the least amount of patience for, which makes sense. But I'm super polite about it. Yeah, see, I can tell, I guess, Lily, that you are not quite as
Oh, no, never. Like, I will internally rage, but I will very politely thank and shut it down. Like, in conversation, you can tell when you're like, somebody's not encouraging you to go on. And that's more of a tact I would take, especially with a stranger.
I just am amazed by that because
Yeah.
I like I would never. tell somebody I don't know how they should parent a child, and yet the amount of time that I get that is just like in the grocery store or like it
Yeah.
just happened where my
Who
son.
gives it? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
Tell the story.
well, I'll tell you the story. So my son has Heelys. He bought them himself. If you don't know what Heelys are, they're the shoes with the wheels in the heel. And he saved up $75 to buy this himself. He's 11
Spending.
years old. I was very impressed by it. It was funny. We bought it and then it showed up and he was so excited. And we opened the package and there was a Bible inside and no shoes, a Bible. And we're like,
What?
what the hell? Someone had stolen the shoes en route and replaced it with a Bible, which weighed, I guess, the same. And
Oh,
that's
that's
how they
twisted.
stole it. And, but it's so twisted too, because I'm like, I felt like attacked. I'm like, not only did you take my shoes, but you're trying to convert me. Like, this isn't fair. I like took a picture of it and sent it back, but he was devastated because he's like, I lost my $75. Like, this
Yeah.
was his first, it was
That's a
very
big deal.
visceral.
Yeah.
And so, but I got the refund, we got the new ones out, and he loves them because he paid for them. They're
Of
his,
course.
and he wears them everywhere. You can take the heels out, so he wears them to school, and he takes the heels out before he gets to school, so he can walk around in school. And he loves them so much. And we are walking down the street, and he's wheeling, and this person out of nowhere, just random person, comes up, and he's like, and it was a guy, and he's like, he could really break his neck. And I'm like, "What?" It's like, those Heelys, you could really break your neck on those things. Who the fuck asked you, dude?
You might get hit by a car when you go into the parking lot, so better be careful.
I I'm I'm like he's very good at it, and I'm not worried. And then I walked, but I'm like, the balls on somebody. He's just come to a random person saying, "You know what? Your son's probably gonna die. That's probably
What?
what's gonna happen because he got these." I'm
So
like, what the
helpful.
hell is wrong with you? Who has the cojones to come up to a stranger and say that crap?
I
But
I
what I
I don't
really
know.
think it was he doesn't like that this kid is wheeling around the grocery store. He probably felt like he could get run into, and this was his way of, like, making his displeasure known.
That may be, but I genuinely think people think they're doing you a service. Like, "Hey, dummy, maybe you didn't realize that your kid could get hurt." Because I've had it like so my daughter, has very, very light blue eyes, and was very, very blonde, and so, she would squint in the sun, and, like, we would try to make sure her, shade was on in the stroller, or, like, she would we would give her sunglasses or whatever it may be, and the amount of people who would, like, say something about, like, basically letting that baby outside. Like, she's not a vampire. Like, she's not gonna melt. She's got sunscreen on. We're very conscientious about it. Like, she's fine. It was kind of shocking. It was shocking.
Well, the inherent assumption under all of this is that you don't know what you're doing. I
Right.
mean, that's
Somebody else knows
underneath.
better. Yeah.
Someone else knows better, and it's so just know that every time you are giving somebody an unsolicited advice, especially
Yeah.
a stranger, you are telling them, "I think you don't know what you're doing."
Yep.
I am implicitly saying you
You
are
don't know what you're doing.
bad at what you're doing, and I need to it's so bad that I, a stranger, need to step in and help.
And that's probably the root of why I react really, really bad to that is like, I don't like being told I don't know what I'm doing ever about anything, which is not totally healthy of me to think. Fine. But I tend to be rather self aware, like knowing when I don't know what I'm doing and asking for help. But like, let me ask. Let me ask you for your advice, for your opinion. Like, especially when it comes to Heelys, like, I spent my entire 8th year on roller skates, like, rolling down hills in the suburbs, like, into the street, like, he's gonna be fine with his
Gonna be
Heely, like
fine, and he's a like,
or he might get hurt,
and
and it's okay.
he might get hurt, but he's a very conscientious kid. He thinks about what I don't want is I don't want him constantly worried about the consequence of every
Mhm.
single action because and as a parent, I do
Yeah.
want him to think about that, but as a human that
Sure.
knows that he needs to navigate the
You get
world,
yeah,
the point of that age, the point of your first 20 years of life is to not care as much about the consequence of your actions
of
because
course.
that's how you discover
It's
things. Like,
learning. Yeah.
that's how you learn.
It's kind of what goes back to, like, that fuck around and find out thing we were
Yeah.
talking about on that other episode, where there is a certain amount of, like I mean, I'm sure I don't know that my mom was around to see me skating down the, like, very steep driveway, but if she had, I'm sure she would have thought like, "Well, she's gonna fall and skin her knees." Like, I bet that's the best way to learn that lesson. Like, kids get hurt.
I know. You know what I love is that, like, maybe 10 years ago, my brother and I sat down with my parents and it just, you have a glass of wine, whatever, you have your one of treat your parents as adults moments. And we started telling them all the things they didn't know we did.
Oh, boy.
And it was awesome because my brother we had a 3-story house because there was a big hill behind it. So if you were to fall off the roof of our house, you would die.
Yeah.
And it had a flat roof at the top. And my brother would go up there with his friends and play football
Yeah.
on the
Sure,
roof,
of course, as you do.
as one does. And I used to throw all of these parties when I was, like 15, 16 during the summer because I was by myself looking after the house during when my everyone was gone. I would have huge parties, everybody would
Oh
be
my god.
drunk and this and that. Guess what? Nothing happened. Like
Yeah,
everything was
luckily
fine.
luckily nothing happened. I was the same, like, I did
Yeah.
terrible things that my parents still to this day don't know about. We've talked
Well,
about
no,
this
you should
before.
tell them. Sit down and tell them because it
Absolutely not. I
is
still feel guilty.
but it's so much fun to watch them come to terms with 2 things. 1, holy crap, I had no idea all this was happening. But 2, it's like you have to confront the fact that everything is fine. Like, I think that's really helpful.
I've come to the conclusion, like, as I have teenagers, that maybe my parents were aware of things that I was doing, that they
Uh,
just didn't wanna have the conversation, or, like, as
that I
long as nothing
totally get.
terrible happened, like, that I wasn't quite as sneaky as I thought I was.
I know we well, my parents were genuinely surprised by my brother playing football, but knew about my parties because I didn't realize that they had a narc in the neighborhood who would see that.
See?
And so they weren't surprised about the parties. And the thing was they knew I didn't drink. So I was also
Right.
sober the whole time.
Right.
So they didn't weren't worried about, that. And
Yeah.
the nice thing is my friends were just they would get really drunk and have we were like 16, 17. But then I remember I went to work and then I came home and the entire house was spotless because my friends had felt bad and were appreciative of the fact that they could have them and they had cleaned the whole house.
I've never
So
known a friend like that.
I have, I do have some
That's pretty
good
good.
friends and they cleaned the oven and I still to this day like that's why
That's
these
gonna
2
give
guys
you
I'm
away.
still I mean, I know that's a really good. I love that's a guy would never think that, but you're just like, if I saw a clean oven, I would know. Nope. But so they probably that's maybe the other way they knew.
Yeah.
But it was fine.
From the '80s onward, there's been such a, like, and this is not backed by anything other than conjecture and my own personal experience. Noted. But, like, it feels like there's been a huge influx of, like, advice books and, a million different things that you can buy a book about how to do X, Y, or Z. So, like, I think like, culturally, we are, much more advice seeking, and so maybe, like, that has something to do with, like, why people think that they should give other people their unsolicited advice?
I mean, because there's 2 things there, and one is I think we're more advice seeking, but also I think we live in a time in which everybody feels their opinion is that much more important than
Yeah.
they probably ever did before. Comment sections, every wannabe influencers, like everybody has an
Yeah.
opinion and can't wait to get it out there. So
I
we're
mean, we're sitting here doing this.
we are just as bad as anybody else. I'm worse than Lily, but we're just as bad. But like it's a muscle
Yeah.
that everyone is exercising more, and you want to use it. And you also, if you get comments saying great point, this and that,
It
then
it
you start
encourages
to
you.
think,
Yeah.
I really have some great points. Here would be my point. This isn't advice. My point to people is that when you're putting stuff out there in comments or whatever, like it may be unsolicited, but it's also easy to ignore and
Mhm.
it's in a different context. When you're in somebody's face, that is a
Mhm.
very different
Very
experience.
different context. Very different.
Real life is not a comment section.
And
And so
also, like, what's funny, like, in real life, like, I mean, know your place in a certain way. Like, I can't believe that my ex used to get teenagers giving him advice about, like, how to hold my kid. Like, so my daughter had reflux when she was an infant, like, had colic. She was a very uncomfortable baby. And she was only one of the only ways that she was comfortable is like if she was like laying on anybody's arm with her head in the hand and like head tilted back. And it was like one of the ways that we just like figured out like as we were trying to comfort her with her colic that she was comfortable. And he would, if she was fussy and they were out, he would carry her instead of leaving her in the stroller to cry and carry her that way because she felt better. And teenagers would come up to him and be like, "Yo, mister, you can't carry your baby that way." Like, and not just teenagers, but like all kinds of people would say, "You can't carry your baby like that," because they think that her neck is breaking or she's uncomfortable. When in reality, like in your brother's situation, it was a tactic that made her
Uh-huh.
feel the best because she had terrible GERD. It was just shocking.
This comes back to another podcast episode we had with Lenore Skenazy, where, she had said, assume competence. And she meant it with your kids. But I would say with
With everybody
parents
else.
in general, why don't we assume competence that unless somebody is doing something patently illegal, that, let's assume that they might know what they're talking about or they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point because, so far the kid was alive, and I think, like, there has to be, like, I think in many cases, people give advice or, like, intervene because they think they're being helpful. Maybe you
Yeah.
don't know that your baby shouldn't be held like that or whatever. I think that there are right places to intervene, like, if a mom talking at the playground doesn't happen to see their kid just makes a run for the gate and is, like, headed out there, like, you intervening and grabbing the kid and being like, "Hey, your kid," like, great way to intervene that's actually
Yeah.
saves somebody's life. Instead of running into the street, you've stopped them and made them cry, whatever. But, like, be aware of what the situation is, like, does it warrant you stepping in?
Well, that's not what when you're stopping the kid, you're not advising. You're like, you know what, you really should stop your
You
kid
should keep
from
an eye
running
on the
out to
kid, yeah.
traffic. You should do.
Mhm.
You're actually just helping. Like that's just being helpful.
Yes.
And that I don't mind at all. Like,
Yes, agree.
a little bit of
Totally agree.
unsolicited help
Yep.
with somebody who understands what you're going through. That is I've never had a problem with that because
Same
there's no
here,
judgment in that. That's just
and,
doing.
that's how I mean, I live in the city, so, like, all the playgrounds there's a million playgrounds all over the place, and there was, like, a kind of a communal parenting thing that happened where,
Yeah.
like, there's the playgrounds are enclosed, but, like, there's places your kids will go in the playground when you can't totally see, like, you're sitting on the bench over here, or your kid has run over to the swings over there, and some other parent will make them stop fighting or, like, put down the stick or, like, don't climb up there because there's a screw like, I loved that kind of communal responsibility part of, giving, telling my kid what to do. But it feels very, very different than, like, telling me, "You shouldn't sit on a bench over here where you can't have the line of sight with your child." Like, it's okay,
Oh
okay,
my god.
thanks.
I'm triggered just hearing you in that tone say that. Like that triggers me. Well, it is implied judgment, and that's why I think it's worse with strangers in that I don't strangers have no right to judge me just like I have no right to judge them.
Yeah,
Um, it's a different kind of hell when it's like family
yeah.
because family I find that sometimes that advice can be weaponized with your family.
Mm, mhm.
And,
Same
it's
over.
like, it's like advice from your family is often their way of letting you know that they think you're
They
doing
don't
something
approve.
wrong
Yeah, yeah,
without saying that you're doing something wrong. It's like,
yeah.
I got to figure out how I can get my point of view across. And so I'm going to
Mhm.
do it through this unsolicited advice.
Yep.
And it is its own special hell to me when it happens.
I don't think a lot of people will do that to me and my family, um, but because everybody's afraid of me. Uh, the one my dad will I mean, everybody does it, like and maybe this is just, like, passive aggressive, but, kind of passively, where, like, they're telling you what they think the best thing is, not necessarily like, "You should do this," but, like, in my example with my dad, like, "Those kids need more space." Like, "Okay." They haven't do they? I mean, right now
Says
they do
who?
because
I'm
they're
sorry. Do you have documentation to that effect? Like,
I remember sharing a room with my sister, and we turned out okay. Like, it's Not that big of a deal. I'm also the youngest, which you would think that would mean I would get more advice, but I feel like I was always the most responsible, so I don't really get a ton of it. So that could be something too.
Yeah. Well, it's so hard too because on the flip side is I want to give advice and have to stop myself all the
Yeah.
time. It's hard like you everyone listening to this recognizes both sides of
Yeah.
this coin here.
No, that when you were telling your story about your brother, I was like, you
I know
can't do
you
that
wanted
to
to say
yeah.
something.
It
Like,
immediately triggered like the judgment and like that's wrong and like you shouldn't be doing that. Like it's such a beautiful example of why
I
you
know.
shouldn't. Oh my God,
It's
it's
the
so good.
whole gamut. It's the whole gamut, and it's like, as I because I wanted to say something, as he's doing I had such this strong reaction. It's so
Mhm.
different than what I would do,
Yeah,
and yet, when he turned and explained it to me, 1, I'm so glad he did. Like, I think it was really he was aware of my impulse or the impulse of
sure.
anybody in
Or
that
how it might
situation,
look. Yep.
how it might look, and he's like, he had to and he explained it, and I do think sometimes we don't want to explain those things or,
Yeah.
like, we are embarrassed to explain those things. It's, let's direct is better. I think direct is always better.
Yeah.
I had this conversation yesterday at the party how direct is better. My sister-in-law, is very big on coasters, and I put, my cup in a coaster, and my cousin is next to me, and she had her bottle of water on the table, and so my sister-in-law looked at me and says, "Scott, thank you so much for putting your cup in the coaster." And my cousin immediately goes, "Oh," and puts her cup in the coaster. And I'm like, "That is the most passive aggressive thing I have
Wow.
ever just tell her to put it in the
Just
coaster."
I know. People will do what you want in those
I don't
situations
just
if it's you.
and she's like, "Well, I thought that the kinder thing was to do what I did." I'm like, "In what way is that
No.
kind?" But I'm so
No.
glad that I directly called her out on it
Oh my god.
because
Did
she
you say
honestly
that in the
did think
moment?
in the moment, I said
Oh,
that.
good.
And she said, "Well, I thought it was kinder." And it's so interesting. You unpack the whole thing, and she thinks she's doing the right thing. She's
Yeah.
not doing it to be I mean, I'm sure part of her was, like, mad about it, and a little bit of that goes into it, but really, she thought she was picking the kinder option, and she wasn't. And we were able to all talk about it.
It's a good point because my mother is the queen of passive aggressive. Um, it's probably why I'm so
So direct.
uncomfortably direct. Yeah, to both of you. It's 'cause my mother's not that I can't be passive aggressive too, but I'm sure that she has given me advice that I didn't even pick up on because it was so passive
They're
aggressive.
just she's such a master.
Oh my
So
god,
good
like,
at it.
when I split up with my ex the first time, mind you, I had 2 8-month-olds, a job that couldn't pay my rent. I just lost, like, the love of my life, and I was, like, 31, and my life had just fallen apart, and my mother said to me, "Well, I'll never say a bad word about that man. He's the father of your children." And I was like in that moment, I wanted to hear something wildly different, but I see it now as, like, that's passive aggressive advice. She was saying to me, "Don't ever say anything bad about your ex in front of your children."
For your kids.
That's totally what that was. That was oh my
But you know
god.
what? I gotta give props on that though, because that is the better way to get that point across.
It's I don't think it's necessarily the better way to get things across
Maybe you're
because
right, better
as
is the
her
wrong word.
daughter, she could say to me, like, "Listen, when I divorced your dad, people said to me really terrible things about him in front
Yes.
of me, in front like, but he was still the father of my children, and I actually didn't wanna hear it. So, just, like, be aware of that happening, like, and just know that I'll never say anything bad because, I respect that." Like, there's a way to
You're
do
right, you're
that.
right, that is you're right. No, you're right, that is the I like the fact that she kind of put herself into it as well.
Yeah,
Like, she essentially puts herself on your side.
yeah,
So I like that part of it, but you're right. The rest of
right.
it
In
would
the
help
moment, I wanted
contextualize
to
it
hear,
better.
"He's a total shithead and I
Of
hate him."
course. Of
That's what I
course.
wanted out of my mom in that moment.
What an advice ninja your mom is, though. That is
I
like
know. I've just
that
missed it all these years.
I know she's been subtly, she's been doing that kind of advertising way before it was in vogue.
I guess
Man,
so.
well, I got to take your mom's Instagram. I'll follow to learn how to get advice
Don't
across.
tell her that she can get on Instagram. Jeez.
Okay, you've been keeping
We
her
don't
off of that. I know my mom is just figuring out how to text, and that's turning into its own thing. So
Scott, I can't tell you how I wish she didn't know how to text. Like, my mother now treats texting like long form, letter
no,
writing, and I'm like,
I know.
she doesn't
What you get rid
get
of
it.
those big things, those big
And
like
does
chunks.
your mom sign hers "Love Mom"? Because my mom signs her texts at the end, "Love Mom." I don't think she understands what texting is. I mean, she gets texts. She has her own texts. I just don't think she understands, like, the social dynamics of communication hierarchy.
I have never had more empathy for that than now because I just had to get on WhatsApp for my
Oh, yeah.
job. And they want to start a WhatsApp for this show that I'm producing.
Okay.
And I am so out of my depth in the way that they're using it because it's just
Yeah.
this constant conversation that they're having. I don't want to have a constant
Yeah,
conversation.
it's like message boards almost.
Yeah, but it's constantly going off, and I feel like I need to be part of it as part of my
Yeah.
job, but it's like it's a tech that I don't wanna engage in,
I know.
and and whenever I would get mad at my mom for not texting, I'm like, she would call for everything, "Let's just text me,"
Right.
and now I'm like, I get it because it's like I
Yeah.
don't wanna engage in this tech that I don't feel comfortable using because it's not natural to me to engage in it, and it's being driven by someone in their 20s who's very good at this stuff,
Yeah.
and I have to just kind of be like, all right, you get it. And what I'm finding I have to do is separate out my discomfort with it with my anger at being forced to do it, and
Yeah,
my
that's hard.
irritation.
Would you take some advice from a nice 20-something-year-old whippersnapper about how to do it?
I know. Well, and you know what, she's right and I'm wrong. Like,
Yeah.
this is a place you need to be if you want to build an audience. She's not wrong, it's just it's overwhelming and I don't understand it and it
I
irritates me.
know.
I know. And
Uh,
then and then she has to give me advice on how to use it. And I'm like, no more unsolicited advice. I should be asking for advice. Well, here's the question. Here's my
yeah, go ahead.
question for you. How should we be asking for advice when we need it? When we spend all of this time kind of, being bombarded with unsolicited advice,
Yeah.
how do we ask for advice in a way that doesn't open the floodgates to all the unsolicited advice?
I tend to do it when it's like, I'm desperate feeling. So, like,
Really, it's back against the wall. If I press the
yeah,
button, I press the button. And what else are you
right.
gonna do?
And I mean, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind because I think a lot of people, I mean, you seem to be way more open to receiving advice than I am, obviously. And you seem to like seek it out more than I do too,
A
which
little, yeah, a
is
little bit more, yeah.
a little bit more. So
Not a lot, a
I,
little.
I think being aware that somebody seeking your advice is inherently in a position of vulnerability, or often in a position of vulnerability, that I think that's something to keep in mind. So that doesn't answer that. Like, how should we? I think that I generally, depending on the scale of the advice that I need,
Yeah.
or and like what area, like I will very clearly ask, like, I don't know what to do. What should I do? Or what have you done in X, Y, and Z? Or how can I get X, Y, and Z? Like, for one thing, it's like, hey, I'm gonna change the faucet in my kitchen sink. I'm gonna go to YouTube probably. Like, I mean, if I
Yeah.
need to ask my super, if I'll call them in at some point, fine. But I'm gonna go to YouTube. But if I'm asking, like, I don't know, parents of teens who are older than me, like, and I've done this a lot actually around college stuff, where it's so different than when I applied to college that
Yeah.
I've asked other people who've like have kids who have done it recently, like, what did you do here? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that? How should we do this? Like, and I'm straightforward about it. So I think most people tend to be like when they actually want advice, they're going to be rather straightforward about it and like listen for that rather than like thinking that you might insert yourself in a place. Like, not with Scott because I tend to tell him what I think and what he should do on this podcast, but in real life, in regular life, I will sometimes even ask, like, if it's unclear to me, like if somebody's just unburdening themselves, or
Yeah.
seeking advice, I will ask the question, well, do you want advice about this, or you just want to like talk about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, once again, be direct. It's not breaking a social more. I mean, at least I feel be direct. Um, because that's anytime it's something I have to work on to be
Yeah.
direct because
Well, because it
it's,
can feel uncomfortable.
yeah, it is uncomfortable and it's a risk. Like
Yeah.
you feel like you're taking a risk that it will be received poorly to be direct. Um, but when I actually am direct, it's rarely backfired on me.
Of
Like
course.
it rarely has. And
And like if you are and it's simple and it's received badly, you can always be like, okay, sorry, my bad. Like, and then just like
yeah,
kind of back out of it, you know?
I don't quite know how to shut down advice. And
Mm,
like,
that's harder.
especially because a stranger, it's one thing. You're never going to see him again.
Yeah.
But like, with family or friends, it's like, how do you get across that you're not really open to just sort of unsolicited advice
Yeah.
without it really backfiring? Like
Well,
and I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do
I've
that.
kind of also adopted like the flip side occasionally where and this is less so with family because like, family relationships are complicated. But with friends, I'll say something like if somebody starts to say like, well, you could X, Y, or Z, I will literally say, I just am bitching about this.
You are the shining star of directness. Like
But not
I
always. Like,
aspire to Lily levels of directness.
I mean, it sounds like I am, but like obviously, like I fail immensely in other ways and being way too passive and not actually saying what I think. But in certain things, I feel free to be direct, and certain environments, I do like safe feeling environments. But like if it's with a friend, like that's something that I've taken from, and it might be even like social media shit where people have suggested, like, are you asking for advice? Are you asking for me to listen? Or, and then
Yeah.
I've just like kind of used it in ways that I have found helpful. And g- it's so easy to avoid getting frustrated with somebody giving you advice when you just like kind of cut it off and be like, listen, I'm just bitching about this. Like, I know it's going to be fine. Like, or however you want to finish that sentence. But I have found that very helpful because then people immediately like start listening differently.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I've never tried that. I'm like, even I'd have to practice in front of the mirror saying those words. Like, I'm like, I've never said it.
I mean, you can feel see if you don't feel comfortable saying bitching, like, you could just say like, "Oh, I'm
No,
just
I feel,
talking it out," or whatever.
yeah, I'll curse.
I know. But it's easy, like, once you have a phrase that you can put into that
yeah,
situation, it becomes easier to say it, like, in the moment, like, not to, like to let yourself, like, fall too far down the rabbit hole. I mean, I did this with my anxiety, like, when I had therapy, like, they would give me, like, phrases, like, when I was starting to feel a panic attack that, like, I could start doing or, like, tools or whatever, and I literally use this one, like, as a tool, like, "Ugh, I'm just bitching about this. I'm not really blah, blah, blah."
I mean,
It's
it
an
really
easy
is the
one.
best thing. I mean, the therapization of our lives. I mean, the best thing about it is it's these tools and the practice that you get handling
Yeah,
these situations that we all just muddle through all the time.
yeah,
And having a sentence and knowing how it's going to come out and feeling comfortable in what the reply will be, and like, you know even because even with friends there's still that, you know there's nothing worse than an offended friend. An
yeah,
offended stranger is way easier than an offended friend.
yeah,
And I have old friends that still get offended
sure.
by things. And plus with advice, it's the worst part because
Yeah.
you're actually attacking their point of view by saying, "Well, I don't," they can feel it that
I
way.
don't care what you yeah, I
I
don't
don't
care what
care
you
what
have
you
to say.
have to say.
Yeah,
And that can hurt. So I think having that tool and that language to be able
yeah.
to put it into a context
Disarm
that
it.
doesn't
Yep.
attack them and just says, "I'm just bitching."
Yeah.
And most friends will understand that
Yeah.
impulse. Not looking for advice, just bitching, let's
Yep.
bitch about it.
I just wanna be heard.
And
Yeah.
you just want to be heard. And that's such a great way to think about it. I'm going to start practicing my sentence. It was the other place that's really fraught is, especially as a single parent and you're dating again,
Yeah.
it's advice from your boyfriend or girlfriend on how are they giving you advice on how to raise your kid? Are you
Right.
giving them advice? And I find it interesting because I've been with my girlfriend now for a year and a half, and her parenting style is very different from my parenting style,
Yeah.
and we just do things differently, and I she's raised 2 great kids, so I can't fault her for it at all,
Sure.
and, hopefully she feels the same with me, but we have it, and as we get more comfortable with each other, she was very good in the beginning, and I think so was I, but now it's starting to break down a little bit, and we're starting to give each other advice, and
Yeah.
that, like, I have to stop myself from, like, when her daughter goes through stuff at school, and I wanna be like, "Well, you should do this and do that," and I have to stop myself
I
because, like,
know.
"Here's what I think you should say," and this and then I'm like, "I have to stop," because I bet she does not wanna hear that from me.
Like, maybe she does, and, like, sometimes maybe she does, and sometimes maybe it's so I mean, it makes me think about, like, my mom got remarried when I was 10, and so my stepdad was in my life from the time I was really young, but he kind of adopted this approach of, like, "I'm here as your friend and your buddy, and we can do fun things," but, like, he didn't really parent me, because he knew
Mm.
that, I have a dad, and he and I maybe this was just by instinct that he was like, "I'm gonna let your mom lead." I also was a pretty good kid. It would have been weird, had once they got married, or obviously before, it would have been more weird if he had said parenty things to her. And maybe he did, like maybe they did in secret, but it was very
Yeah.
much her leading the charge because it's such an awkward, like tenuous place to be as somebody who's like not the dad or not the mom and but also, like, okay, but we're a family now, so, like, how do we do
Like, I really wanted to bring it up because it's happening in my life, but I have no answers on this one. I mean, my answer really has been to not
Yeah,
try to weigh in at all, and I think that's the right answer
yeah,
because ultimately they're her kids.
yeah,
Even if we were to get married, they're her kids,
totally.
and, she has earned the right by being her parent, to parent the way she wants to parent. It's between her and her co-parent on how they
Yeah,
parent those kids, and the only place I can think of where I would weigh in anywhere is if, let's say, her daughter came to me and asked me for advice on something.
sure.
But the bit that I find hardest to do is not to give my ex advice, but to weigh in on something directly with her daughter,
Yeah,
and that I don't know whether or not it runs counter or not. I just don't know.
yeah,
And so should I be giving an opinion
yeah.
on something when I don't know what the party line is?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's because my ex has lives with this girlfriend, and she's much younger, so it's like a already a weird dynamic, with my kids. Trying to imagine her ever trying to, like, give advice and how my kids might take it, and it's just like, it just would not go well. It would
It would
not
not
go
go.
well at all from my kids' point of view because they're a little bit opinionated too, like their mother. It's so fragile because I was gonna say, like, "Well, have you guys talked about it?" And, like, I don't know where you are in your relationship and, like, where it's progressing to or not, but, like, have you guys talked about, like, what does she wanna hear anything from you about certain things like that?
We haven't talked about it, but it's something that I'm fairly certain that
You know?
she does not wanna hear from
Yeah,
me on that stuff.
yeah,
I mean, she advice in general is difficult when
yeah.
you're, in a relationship because you
Yes.
end up
Yep.
having these 2 concurrent things happening. You have the, you know, issue everybody has with getting unsolicited advice, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, nobody wants to make anybody unhappy.
Yeah,
And so a lot of times you'll put up with it longer, but then you'll be resentful of it. And
yeah.
it's a real fraught
It's
place.
tender. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I was
yeah.
just thinking about, like, how I was in my and I did like talking to my ex about, like, certain things and, like, getting his point of view, but I think it was still that dynamic of I'm seeking out your,
Yes.
um not counsel, like, that sounds way too paternalistic, but, like, seeking out his ear on, like, how do you like, "What do you think about this?" Or, like, he'll still
Yeah.
ask me advice on things that he knows that I'm good at. So it's like, even in the best of situations, it's still complicated, so complicated.
I mean, I have been going back and forth because my girlfriend is redesigning her website. She's a photographer. And so she's redesigning the site. And she asks my advice on it.
Yeah, yeah,
And but I need to recognize when she is asking for actual advice and when really she wants, as Bill Burr likes to put it,
Yeah.
an attaboy. Yeah, he's like, you know, which I love that he's like, so he told his wife, he's like, sometimes stop criticizing me and just give
I
me an
heard
attaboy.
that. Yeah.
Uh, and and it took me a minute to realize that there was a difference there, and
Yeah.
to and it makes sense because she's putting a lot of work into this
Yeah.
thing, and sometimes she just wants that work
Yeah.
recognized.
Yeah. So when she asks, like, what do you think? It's not like, well, you can move that over to the right side, or like maybe this
Exactly,
color is
and
like, yeah. Yep.
you know what I'm talking about. Like
Oh,
I'm saying, like
absolutely. That's why I
the
laughed when I said,
margin, your margin needs to be like. And the
yeah.
problem is, I've been too involved in that,
Yeah.
and so my advice is, I think, expert advice.
Yeah.
It's like move the I think the font needs to be this,
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff.
Well, how's it look on
And
mobile?
oh, yeah. Well, by the way, that's half our conversation. And once again, I'm coming in.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it took her. 6 hours to get
Yeah.
to this point, and I'm nitpicking a tiny little thing. Recognize the work,
Totally.
recognize the effort, and there she's. And so
Yeah.
it took me a second. I think we've got there now, but it's like she got her dander up, and
I will
rightfully so.
say, I've looked at her current site and her work, and I think she's very, very good. So, attaboy. A lot of the times in like male female relationships, like this is such a trope. Like, I'm not quoting science, like, but it's just a trope that women want somebody to listen and men want to solve the problem, like in whatever arguments come up. So I started doing that too with my ex. Is like, I just want to complain about this or like whatever. And I don't want you to try to fix it. And a lot of the times, like, that's the same thing, I think, with advice is like somebody's trying to help you. They're trying to fix your problem. And like, you don't actually want the fix. Like, you just want to like work it out.
Yeah, and this is, by the way, in response to actual conversation. I mean, it's not unsolicited.
Yeah.
In that, like, it's, it's not see something, say something. This is like just how you deal with a conversation. Well, I'm like, oh, that's really helpful because I'm thinking of a few times where I've had these, they just talk. You almost don't want to complain about something with some people because you know that it's going to set off a lecture.
Totally.
And my dad used to be like that sometimes, where it would like set off, where if I knew if I brought something up, and it'd be worse with him because it always then start the value judgment was so on like overt. He'd just be like,
Yeah.
well, it just sounds like if you get this wrong, it's gonna ruin him forever. And then you're like,
Oh no. I think my advice in general is like, unless somebody specifically asks you for your advice, don't give it.
I think that's the best way. And assume incompetence in parenting, and
Yeah.
be direct when you're getting it. Don't give it and be direct when you're getting it. I mean, you don't go wrong as you think you're gonna go, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, I don't ever see it stopping. It's so human nature.
Yeah. It really is. Like, it really is.
Well, guys, it starts with you. It starts with me. I
Absolutely.
can't control the rest of the world, but I can stop telling people that, not to yell at their kids when they drop their ice cream. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like or a crazy comment. We'd love to hear from you, and see you again soon.